Hi, my name is Noliwe Rooks. I'm a professor at Cornell University in Africana Studies, and I'm also the director of American Studies. A few years ago, I published a book called Cutting School, Privatization, Segregation, and the End of Public Education. The reason that I actually wrote the book was I was trying to understand in the from 29 to 2017, why it was that all of a sudden we had all these billionaires who seemed really concerned about the education of rural children and black children who lived in urban areas, and why it was that we had a spate of organizations like Teach for America or charter school chains like the KIP chain, or the Success Academies, all of a sudden popping up in these same communities where black children and Latinx children and poor children had for some time been undereducated. In writing the book and doing the research to try to understand that moment in the 20th century, I was led back to the 19th century, where I discovered that post-Reconstruction, the period of time called post-Reconstruction, a lot of the strategies about education that we grapple with today really did take root then. I think the high points of what I discovered is that we have never in this country educated poor children, non-privileged children, children of color in the same ways that we have wealthy white children. In fact, we've gone to some extremes to make sure that the kinds and the forms of education are very different than what wealthy white children are afforded. I also found out, my research made clear that we have experimented educationally on children who are poor, who are of color, who go to underfunded schools very often. We come up with, and have always since the 19th century, come up with ways of teaching them that are experiments that have absolutely no kind of basis in research, have never been done before, that no one's ever thought made any sense. For example, in our contemporary period, one of the fastest growing methods for educating children who are poor, of color, who live in urban schools is cyber education. Cyber education is a form of homeschooling that takes place completely on the computer. So from age 5 to age 18, some of these academies will tell you they can educate your children as well as brick and mortar schools, but that they can stay in their home, that you can pay attention, have oversight. They make it sound great. However, across the country, the children who are being educated by this particular forms of cyber education are failing every test that they're given. And yet, in districts like Philadelphia, the percentage of children, which is up around 20% now in the Philadelphia public schools, who are educated by cyber education, are failing every test, so much so that there was a big move to deny and close all of the charter schools that these billionaires fought back and beat back. So there's experimentation, there's a very different way of educating children. There's also something called, I talk about, segronomics. Segronomics is just a mashup of segregation and economics. It really talks about the ways that the underfunding and the experimentation that I mentioned are actually very lucrative for a handful of companies that make hundreds of millions of dollars a year profiting from this undereducation and experimentation. Some of these companies include surveillance concerns, who document who is supposed to go to schools in various districts. Others are organizations like TFA, Teach for America, who charge these struggling school districts finder's fees. In addition to having to pay teachers for the teachers that they get from Teach for America, struggling districts are having to pay finder's fees per teacher of $2,000 to $5,000. As a result, an organization like TFA has about $400 million in the bank, and yet their method of education is not actually bearing many results, many positive results. So the book that I wrote, where I thought I wanted to talk about the 21st century, the moment that I was living in, actually took me back and made clear to me that the undereducation and the experimentation on certain kids in our country, in our nation, has always been very lucrative, and that those are forms of education that have been with us for a very long time.